Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we break down why we need conservative film critics, like me, based on an embarrassing review of a brand new film. We talk with political satirist Jimmy Dore, a liberal comedian who calls him like he sees him, and why that's so critical these days. And we wrap with an overlooked gem that's perfect to watch after you celebrate the 4th of July. Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, especially if this is your first time listening. Or just tell a friend, or 20. Either one works. You know, I'd like to thank Variety Magazine for making my job a little easier. Every few months, someone approaches me and say, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" And I say, "I'm a conservative film critic." And they often will say, "What's that?" Or, "Why do you need to be a conservative film critic? Just be a critic." And in a perfect world, they'd have a point. But this ain't perfect. And the vast majority of movie critics lean to the left, and it shows in their reviews. But the best recent example of this, and a Hall of Fame entry, comes from Variety. Now, one of their critics is Owen Gleiberman, a guy I really grew to appreciate and enjoy, and certainly less so in recent years. He gave a solid review to a new film called Sound of Freedom. It's a harrowing story, fact-based too, about the modern reality of child sex trafficking. It's just an unbelievable subject matter, ripped from the headlines in all the worst of ways. Here's a peek at the film's trailer.
I don't think I can do this job, Tim. As soon as I lay down, all I see are those kids' faces. How long you been doing this? 12 years? How do you do it?
It is the fastest growing international crime network that the world has ever seen. It has already passed the illegal arms trade, and soon it's going to pass the drug trade.
It's one of the most depressing subjects you can imagine for a big screen movie, but Freedom turns that into an arresting fact-based story that's absolutely worth your time. And Variety critic Gleiberman agreed with me, but that's cool, but not really necessary. It's all subjective. Art is subjective. But it's what he said within his review that, to me, was so upsetting. It really turned my stomach. Here's part of it. The movie has a Christian undercurrent that occasionally becomes an overcurrent, as when Tim Ballard explains why he's fixated on the crime of trafficking. Because God's children are not for sale, he says. Now, let's be honest. God is mentioned a couple of times in the movie, but I'm not sure why that's critical to our understanding of it. This isn't a faith-based movie. It's a movie where a character mentions God once or twice. Big difference. It also was originally made by 20th Century Fox. About 5 years ago, it sat on the shelf. It's a whole long story. Boy, it took so long to get to the big screen. But that's hardly a bastion of faith-friendly content, 20th Century Fox, right? Here's more of the review. Sound of Freedom has been heavily marketed in right-wing media, like Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire. And one of the grand subtexts of all of this is taking on the issue of the horrific criminals who kidnap and traffic children. The film could be seen as adjacent to the alt-right paranoia that was originally stoked by 4chan and QAnon, the wingnut conspiracy theory about a D.C. pizza parlor being a front for a pedophile ring, extending into the larger conspiracy theory that says the culture of liberalism is a racket to protect and cover up the action of pedophiles. Wow, I mean, that's a stretch worthy of a yoga master. Now here comes the official disclaimer, TM. You needn't hold extreme beliefs to experience Sound of Freedom as a compelling movie that shines an authentic light on one of the most crucial criminal horrors of our time, one that Hollywood has mostly shied away from, says the critic. Well, why all this throat clearing? What's the big deal? Well, I think he's also giving himself cover for the sin of liking a movie that appears to have a right-leaning, faith-friendly component to it. Ew, get it off me. It's gross. You see what I mean, though? Would a conservative critic review Sound of Freedom that way? Absolutely not. But nor should a liberal critic. is a prime example of film critics viewing movies through an extreme partisan lens. And just know too many critics do just that. We can tell. Be honest, if I'm ever reviewing a liberal film with that kind of over-the-top approach, you have my official permission to crush me on social media. I will deserve it. Surprise! We've got a bonus interview before we hear from Jimmy Dore. Jason Williams is a writer, researcher, and the founder of the blog Oregon Catalyst. And he wrote a compelling piece called 7 Reasons to Boycott Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Now, I don't support a call for boycotts anytime, but it doesn't take away from the fact that he wrote an excellent column really breaking down the movie and why it's failing in so many levels. So I invited him on the show to share more about Indiana Jones and what might be the biggest summer box office dud. Jason, thanks for joining the show. And before we jump into Dial of Destiny, I want to get your quick thoughts on Indiana Jones in general, the franchise. Is it something that you've enjoyed over the years? Do you have mixed feelings about these particular films? Where do you stand in general? Then we'll jump into the new film.
Well, I have to say, when I saw Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, that was the most fun I'd ever had watching a movie. And when I watched the third installment, you had that feeling of, I don't want this movie to stop. Mm-hmm. And I have learned to appreciate Spielberg. In fact, one of the things I've been doing is going back and watching Spielberg films, and you could do this with Indiana Jones, and just watching what he does with the camera. And it is an enjoyable just watching where the camera goes mm-hmm. in a movie. This is how brilliant he is. And of course, Indiana Jones, we got to remember, it's more than just the movies. There is a book series. There was a TV series, Young Indiana Jones. There was a graphic novel. There are kids' books. So this is more than just a movie. This is something that kids are being introduced to, and a lot is at stake here.
Good point, and I think a lot of that also has to do with Harrison Ford. Take nothing away from Spielberg, who is a visual master at what he does. And I think, like you said, you need to watch it again and again just to fully immerse yourself in how he gets those scenes, how he makes your pulse race, how he creates that tension. He's just a master. But let's start with the Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and the trailer, because I don't think it lit a fire like they wanted it to light a fire. I harken back to the Ghostbusters film from a few years ago, where the trailer really just trashed that film. And every expectation, every argument people had about it, it was like, oh, yeah, it's not funny. So I think the trailer had a similar dismissive impact, but
you're exactly right than you think. The trailer they introduced at the Super Bowl, so many people downvoted it. They had to disable the down button because it just, the negative reviews were so much. And when a movie franchise begins shutting out people's opinions, you've got a bad train wreck coming.
It's a great point, and it's something we're seeing more and more these days. When the reaction isn't what so and so likes, whether it could be a film studio or a candidate or something like that, they shut her down, which is really fascinating. The one line that did stick out with me, and I don't know if it was in the first trailer, maybe even a second one, was the dismissive line about capitalism by Helena, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And I thought, listen, you can have that character's line in the movie. It could be part of something more profound. It could just be defining who she is or the way she thinks. All those things are fine. But putting it in a trailer, when you're trying to really gin up interest across the board, it seemed like a stick in the eye. Did you take a similar sentiment from that?
Absolutely. The trailer is where you are showing off your film, and the fact that they put in a punchline slamming capitalism just shows that they're cavalier about their politics. Now, as this movie comes out and they do that, there's another movie in the theaters right now, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, where a Disney-owned character, Spider-Man, where they make another joke making fun of capitalism. And if that wasn't bad enough, the Disney movie Ant-Man that came out in January, they have a line in there saying how good socialism is. So we're talking just like 200 days of Disney characters in film, twice making fun of capitalism and once touting socialism. It's like, this is way too much politics. especially since, these films are geared towards family and kids, and it's like, what, we're not expecting politics.
To defend Disney, I'm sure that everyone on the set of these movies is paid exactly the same, and they've distributed their income evenly. So there's no tier system here. But it is amazing, And I think when I watched Style of Destiny, and I don't think I hated it. I didn't hate it, and I didn't dislike it as much as some of my peers. But I also thought I could think in my seat of so many different ways you could tell this story, or so many different ways you could rally behind Indiana Jones one last time. And just specifically, let's just say you open the movie where he is retiring, where he's a little burned out, where he's maybe drinking a bit too much. And then with this discovery, with this adventure, he becomes alive again. He realizes what his purpose is. He knows he's older. He knows this might be his last adventure. But by golly, it's going to be a blast. And I just thought, wouldn't that be a wonderful way to send him off? And then, of course, we'll get to spoiler alerts shortly, but that's not how it happens. Talk about how Disney treats these characters. I mean, I did think about Luke Skywalker and how he was introduced in The Last Jedi compared to what happens here. Is there a theme here? What's going on?
Yeah, I call it trash and cash. And what it is, they're doing two things. One is Disney has been just deconstructing and wrecking their characters, the heroes we love. And I'm talking about the Marvel characters, so the superheroes. I'm talking about the Star Wars characters that Disney owns. I'm talking about the Indiana Jones. I'm also talking about the princesses. And you're right. You take Star Wars, you had Han Solo. Everyone loved him. He saved the universe. When Disney picked up Star Wars, they made him divorce his wife. They made him abandon his son. They made him go back to a life of crime. So and then they killed him. So they trashed that. And Luke Skywalker, probably one of the most innocent of all the heroes and good-natured in sci-fi. They took him. They made him into a madman who ran away from the world and hid from the world. He burned down the Jedi Temple, his religion temple. He tried to destroy all of the religion documents that were the foundation of his religion. He was the head person of that. You have, in addition to that, you have with what Disney has done with the Marvel characters. They made Captain America. They just made him very unpatriotic and made him kind of surrender. They took Thor, who's like a demigod. They just made him a comedy routine. They humiliated him throughout his film, 2 different films. And eventually he just said, the actor says, I'm never doing this again.
Yeah, he doesn't sound excited about going back to that franchise, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then real quickly, Disney, what they've been doing with the Disney princesses, obviously for 70 some years, Disney princesses were never in the same room together. Even if you put them on a lunchbox, Disney would have the Disney princesses look the other way. So they were never looked like they were in the same room together because it was something so special and distinct. And then finally, the Disney film Ralph Breaks the Internet, and they put all the Disney princesses into a single room, and they just make them look stupid and foolish. And it's like, why would you do that? Why would you trash? And then I have to add in one more. If you want to know how Disney trashes its own brand, the Dumbo remake, I think it came out in 2017 or 18. They create this character who looks exactly like Walt Disney, who runs a theme park in the 1920s. That theme park looks exactly like Future World, looks exactly like Disneyland. And this character actually says lines similar to Walt Disney. He turns out to be a villain. And the Disney World of the 1920s happens to mistreat animals. So the film, they burn the theme park down, and they just ridicule and make fun of theme parks and this Walt Disney character. And it's like, why would Disney trash themselves in their own movie? It's beyond me.
It's amazing. It's almost like if you ripped off Darth Vader's mask and it was the face of George Lucas was underneath it. It would be that level of self-loathing. Let's talk a little bit about Helena. There was a lot of talk about her before this movie opened, and that's Phoebe Waller-Bridge. and I think she may have had a hand in writing the story as well as, and obviously she's a big co-star here. And some people said, "Oh, she's the new Indiana Jones, and it's going to be, she's going to grab the hat and the whip." And okay, spoiler, that does not happen directly. And whether there was a version of that actually was shot, we don't know. But talk about her character and how she fits in here.
Well, obviously, she takes the center stage in the film. She's the driving force. She makes a lot of the key decisions. She starts everything off. And I think that's a little bit kind of dishonest in the film, because why would you put out an Indiana Jones film and you would downplay the character? And Helena ends up insulting him, ridiculing him. There's a point where Indiana Jones he's been shot, he's wounded, and he's complaining about his wounds and his aches, and she just takes that moment to insult him again. And it's like, what is this character? Why are you Disney felt the need to elevate her so high and to bring our hero so low. And I think they did it because Disney wanted to do a spinoff. They wanted her to continue this saga. And the Kathleen Kennedy, who is head of Lucasfilms, this property here, I mean, she even hinted at, that this might be what happens even before the movie came out. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to talk about the sequel before people have saw the movie the sequel is based upon, before it even hits theaters. So
yeah, and if there's a groundswell, by the way, if people say, "Oh my gosh, I love that Helena character," and everyone starts talking about her, then you can talk about a reboot, a sequel, a spin-off. That would be more organic at the very least.
Yeah, and she's kind of like all the characters here, really, between Indy and Helena, they really brought their character, their ethics really low. Indiana kind of comes off as a bigot at times. And for Helena, I mean, she's out there trying to sell these historical treasures, which is the exact opposite of what the Indiana Jones series is about. It's about protecting history, not cashing money from it. And there are scenes where people come away saying, man, it looks like this film is trying to teach us that Helena is using sex to get what she wants. And I'm like, wow, why did they have to go there? I mean, as I said, they put out Indiana Jones books for kids. So kids are going to be watching this movie. Why would you want to go there showing that women use sex to steal things from people? And it's just all of this bad character moments. It's really bad.
Yeah. I want to wrap things up by looking at Disney in general. We're hitting the brand and the studio pretty hard here, and I think rightly so. But I've argued in recent weeks that it's amazing to me that Disney has basically sunk its brand. It's gotten hyper political. It's gotten partisan. Yes. It's gotten nasty. It's one thing to, have miscues with the characters and the stories. I mean, that's on storytelling, and everyone makes mistakes, and the greatest directors make bad movies, and that's understandable. Creativity is subjective, and it's very tricky to pull off as well as you want it to. If it weren't the case, we'd see all great movies. But what they've done is far beyond that, and I think you've got a brand that is so bulletproof. And now many families don't trust Disney, which is just unthinkable a few years ago, but that's where we are today. So between the brand damage and the properties which have been damaged as well, how do you right this ship? If you're whispering in Bob Iger's ear or someone else at a top Disney Inc., what do you say? What do you do at this point?
Well, let me explain that even a little bit deeper, because what you just said is more serious than you could possibly imagine, because Disney, eight of some of their last films have lost money since the pandemic. We're talking 8 blockbuster films that they put out lost money. It totals like over $700 million. They're putting out films that people are not buying and watching. And and of course they have not yet made a profit from the Disney Plus streaming service, because it takes a long time to build that subscriber base. Well, now they've been losing billions on it, and they've been losing millions of subscribers. So I just want to paint the dire picture
Sure.
that Disney is in. If Disney wants to correct that, they need to go back to the magic. And part of the magic is people watch their films. You know, I watched Beauty and the Beast for the first time a few years ago, and I was blown away by, first of all, how artistic it was, how beautiful it was. None of these remakes are beautiful. They're dark, they're ugly, they're CGI'd. You know, but back in the day, they made things artistic. And Disney came out of a slump before. The 70s and early 80s was the big Disney slump. Then the Disney Renaissance happened. The other thing about Beauty and the Beast is that when Belle saw her father in jail, she goes to the Beast and says, "Put me in jail. My father is sick." And the Beast lets her dad out of jail, and she throws herself in jail. And it is one of the more compassionate scenes you will see in any Disney movie. It is touching. You can see the Beast himself being physically moved by this love action. Now, when they do the remake, the modern Disney remake of Beauty and the Beast, instead of giving herself to replace her dad, she tricks her dad and throws him out of the prison. She locks herself in and tells her dad, "Don't worry, I'll be back by midnight," from the jail. So they took something that was once beautiful, a woman giving her life to save her dad, to me, one of the better scenes of any Disney movie, one of the most loving things ever done. They took that out and made it into, they took the heart of it out. And if Disney wants to get back on track, you need to make movies that inspire people, that help the parents feel like, oh yeah, things I'm trying to tell my kid, oh, they're in this film because people are so virtuous and good. But you look at these movies, like this Indiana Jones movie, there is hardly any character value, any virtue in here. It's like these people act like the people you disrespect. They're not heroes anymore.
Yeah.
And finally, that's what obviously Maverick and Top Gun, that was a very heroic movie, and that one went to go break records. And when Hollywood gives people things that are inspirational and beautiful, that's where audiences flock to it.
And I want to add one, that's beautifully said. I want to add one more thing to it. I think one of the reasons why we watch certain movies again and again is that we long for those values, that maybe we're not actively cheering on the heroism or the strong moral compass of the heroes themselves. But we recognize that it's part of the story. So maybe as we're watching for the beautiful visuals or the the rip-roaring action, a part of us is thinking, hey, we like what these characters are, who they are, the messages they're sending, and maybe on a subconscious level that matters to us. So great points all. And if you want to read more about what Jason has to offer as far as pop culture and other subjects, you can go to OregonCatalyst.com. That's the website. And Jason, thank you so much. I really appreciate this breakdown. And as much as I study and follow these subjects, you brought up a lot of new facts I didn't know about. So I appreciate that so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
I've been dying to have some more liberal voices on the show, and Jimmy Dore is a perfect choice for more than a few reasons. First of all, he's a very funny political satirist. And if you listen to the Jimmy Dore Show, it has great insights on the political scene, lots of humor, and lots of freedom-friendly banter. Huge, right? Plus, Jimmy is a liberal pundit who doesn't cling to his fellow progressives' narratives. When President Joe Biden makes a mistake, and that happens a time or two, Jimmy is all over it. And when every mainstream journalist fell for the Russian collusion hoax, Jimmy was crying foul from the jump. That's just amazing. Now, listening to Jimmy, at least for me, can be bracing at times. He is a progressive. He is liberal, and some of his views run counter to mine. But you know what? Because I know he's a sincere voice, it makes me reassess my views when I hear what he has to say. That's a healthy approach to our troubled times, absolutely. And if you found the pandemic lies as maddening as I did, and boy, I still can't stop thinking about it, you're going to love Jimmy's new stand-up special, COVID Lies Are Funny. Here's a sneak peek.
But the weird thing that happened around COVID, I'd never noticed this before in any other time of my life, but you weren't allowed to ask questions and at any point during this. You just had to do what the man on the TV said, right? You had to do what the man on the TV said without questions, and then you're a good person. But if you question it, then you're a white supremacist Trumper. They're like, whoa, no. No, I didn't vote for Trump. I just have questions. Jimmy, only dumb people ask questions. No, I'm pretty sure we're supposed to question authority. It's like a value. Is that what they taught you in comedy school? Yeah, that is what they taught me in comedy school.
I am thrilled to share my conversation with Jimmy Dore. Jimmy, thanks for joining the show. You know, when I learned you were going to be on the show, I texted a buddy of mine. He's a very conservative guy. I was kind of curious his reaction. And I said, hey, I'm getting Jimmy Dore on the show. And he wrote back to me this about your podcast. He said, that's where I get my news. I was kind of curious what your reaction to that is.
Well, those are people that they don't have to agree with me politically to appreciate my authenticity, right? So they even though they disagree with me, they know I'm telling them what I think is the truth, and that it's not, it hasn't been corrupted by pressure of a corporation or my interest in moving up a corporate ladder or anything like that. So I think that's what people are looking for. I think that was a big appeal of Trump to a lot of people, was that, and by the way, that is the reason why the establishment doesn't like him. He did it again. He told the truth about our foreign policy that the establishment doesn't want him telling. And what truth is that? The reason why we go to war. They asked him the first time, why are you leaving troops in Syria? And he said, for the oil. And they're like, you can't do, that's the president of the United States. So giving the game away of our whole foreign policy. And then he just did it again at a speech the other day where he talked about when he was president, Venezuela, we could have had all that oil. We could have had all that oil. They were ready to go. And of course, he's exaggerating. And then he said the oil's horrible. He goes, it's the worst oil anyway. It's the dirtiest oil, which it's called heavy crude. And it's not like sweet crude, but it is heavy crude. But they have refineries that refine that stuff. So that's why if we wanted to overthrow him in the first place, is because we wanted his oil. Anyway, I know that's a long answer to that question, but it makes me feel good that they don't see me as an enemy, and I don't see them as an enemy. People who are conservatives, also known as my neighbor and my mother-in-law, so I'm not going to hate people because we don't agree politically. I think we all want the same things, but we just have different ways to get there.
Yeah.
And and I think they appreciate that. Right now, the establishment has got their media dividing the country in every which way possible. And if you don't agree with some politically, then they're the worst person in the world. Then they're either a white supremacist, or they're or a terrorist, or Dylan Mulvaney. There's nothing in the middle. And so that's my show's a real pushback against that.
Yeah. It's an interesting time we're living in because we're extremely tribal, and yet some of the political labels are falling away. A lot of the work you do crosses over. Matt Taibbi was a progressive journalist, and now he's the king of the Twitter files, and the left hates him at times. You exposed Russiagate on your show so expertly. Is that a Trump fallout? Is it a larger cultural piece that he's just a fraction of? Why are the labels maybe changing or loosening a bit?
Well, I think what happened was that, the Democratic Party it turned on the workers right around 1993. And it's been downhill since then. So they don't have a way to appeal. They're not materially different from the Republicans, except on the outer edges of issues and the culture wars, and which is why we talk about the culture wars so much. There's two reasons for it. One is that the Democrats and Republicans serve the same people, it didn't matter if it was Donald Trump was president or if it was Joe Biden president. They were both going to crush that railroad workers strike and their ability to organize. So that's called real fascism. So this whole idea that somehow fascism might come to America is a joke, because we're living in, this is an oligarchy. That's not hyperbole. And that was proven over a decade ago, I think now, by the Princeton study. And so our vote doesn't really matter. We don't really have a voice in our government. And they don't serve us. They serve the donor class, even the ones who pretend to not take their money, like the Squad and those Justice Democrats and Ro Khanna and people like that. They are all just, they're proper right now. They're all war pigs. Why would you vote for these wars if you don't take the military-industrial complex money? It's because both parties do, and the parties are the boss. And so, AOC would never cross Nancy Pelosi in a meaningful way, and so that's why we have Democrats voting to crush workers' railroad union strikes and to fund Nazis in a proxy war with Russia, which is the antithesis of what it means to be a lefty.
Yeah.
So that's what we're left with today. So I forgot the question already.
That's okay, but I want to dig a little deeper there, because it seems like, given everything you said and the reality that we face, it's a golden age for political comedy, an absolute gold-mine material. And yet a lot of our satirists have become bland. They were predictable. The late night crews, when they were working before the strike, you knew the setup, you knew the punchline, you knew the targets. What happened here? I mean, this is a golden moment for the truth to power side of comedy, but we're not seeing it. Excluding you, and there are some other folks around the mainstream who maybe are bringing it, but a lot of them aren't. What changed?
Can I just get a great question? I remembered your first question.
Okay.
So I want to answer that one. What happened? So what happened politically was that the Democratic Party moved to the right. And so they became the authoritarians, especially around COVID. And so now, if you were questioning authority during COVID, that was considered right wing.
Like Tim Robbins.
Go ahead.
Like Tim Robbins.
Yes, exactly.
Regressive actor around.
And Jon Stewart, when he did that accurate joke about where the COVID-19 virus came from, and he did it on Stephen Colbert's show about it came from the Wuhan lab, of course. And it was a brilliant joke. It was hilarious. And then he was excluded from polite society, liberal society, and he was called a right winger. And he didn't, and he even admitted that we found out that if you believed in the lab leak theory, that made you a right winger, and if you believed it came from nature, that made you a left winger. But no, it doesn't make you either of those things. That's just what they wanted you to believe. So that goes back to my original point of the media couching everything in a way that divides the country. And so what happened is people like Matt Taibbi, people like Aaron Mateg, we all stayed true. Max Blumenthal, we stayed true to what it meant to be a lefty. We're anti-war, we question authority, and we're for freedom of speech. We're against censorship, right? Because I think RFK Jr. said it when he was on my show. Can you remember a time in history when the people doing the censoring turned out to be the good guys? Yeah. Of course, never. So you got to be against that in all its form, but they're not, right? So the Democratic Party actually shifted to the right. They became authoritarian. They became for censorship. They became pro-war, and they crushed workers' union. And so if you're against all that stuff, they call you a right winger. And I've been telling this since 2016. If you get to the left of a Democrat, the first thing they do is they don't engage your argument. The first thing they do is they try to discredit you. Then they call you a right winger, and then maybe they'll listen to your argument. But that's what happened. And so that's what's happened to people like Glenn Greenwald. That's what's happened to people like Matt Taibbi, people like myself. We've stayed true to our principles, and everybody else moved to the right. And that's exactly the game that's being played. Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie Sanders, and they called him a right winger.
Yeah,
that's the game. So that's the game that's being played constantly. And so that's all they have. They do it to Russell Brand. They do it to me. They do it to Matt Taibbi. They do it to Glenn Greenwald. They call us right wingers because we're actually still we don't pledge our allegiance to the Democratic Party, and that's all they have left is then to just try to discredit you and call you a right winger. Okay, that's the long answer to that.
Okay,
and
no,
The second question that you asked me about what happened to is it breaks my heart, right? To see every late night comedian just go, of course they work for the man. And so it's just amazing. Their checks get signed by Pfizer, right? And so they ain't gonna go along. It's just the way the oligarchs got the media to couch everything as either you're for that. If you're against, if you question the vaccine, you're a Trumper, even though Trump wants credit for the vaccine. If you are against lockdowns or masks, or if you're actually for the actual science, you're some kind of a right winger. It's like they politicized everything because that's all they have left now is narrative control. That's all the game. People see the game. The game was up in 2016 with Bernie Sanders. Half the people who voted in the Democratic Party voted for Bernie Sanders, and he was the guy running against the Democratic Party in 2016. So people were done with the Democratic Party, and obviously they were done with the Republican Party because Trump ran against the Republican Party, and he won. So the people were done, and all they have left is Russiagate, which now the Durham report reveals that it was 100% hoax. It was made up by the Clinton campaign and the FBI, and everybody knew it. And that's why they had to lie to the FISA courts to get the phone taps on the Trump campaign because it was all made up. So, okay, that's all they have left is narrative control, and that's why this is happening. The Democrats and Republicans work for the exact same people. Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden have the exact same policy when it comes to Ukraine, and the military-industrial complex, and to those striking railroad workers. Now, and the fact that now that abortion's on the table again, Democrats love that because that's all that they have to run on now is gender assignment surgery, pride flags, and just cultural issues. That's all, and abortion. That's it. And Barack Obama could have codified abortion into law. It was his first day on the job, which is what he promised, and he didn't do it. Just like Joe Biden didn't give you a $2,000 check, just like he didn't give you student debt relief, just like he didn't make marijuana illegal, just like he didn't give you health care like he said he was going to give you a public option, just like he didn't raise the minimum wage. It's amazing. Yeah. These how similar they are because they work for the exact same people. And what they're doing to Donald Trump right now, what people don't realize is that they would be doing the exact same thing to Bernie Sanders if Bernie Sanders ever had the nuts to grab power, which he does not.
Yeah. One of the things that you're doing is calling balls and strikes as you see them. And that obviously has fans of my friend who is a conservative and he's giving you a fair shake. But how else does that impact the work you do? I mean, it may broaden your fan base for sure, and there may be other perks, but is there a downside to that? Either peers within your industry or gigs falling away? I mean, you hear things like that. I was just curious what it's been like for you in the last couple of years.
Oh, sure. It's been, it's as Carl Jung says, we live in a world of opposites. So it's been great. There's a real upside to that. I get to speak my truth. I get to actually challenge power centers with my comedy. And I get to attract a broad range audience, a real wide variety of people, which is why I always admired George Carlin's audience. And, I remember when I went to see George Carlin the first time, I was really shocked by his audience. It was everybody, right? It was hippies. It was guys in business suits. It was, teenagers. It was senior citizens and everybody in between, black, white. And I was like, wow, that guy's really doing it, and that's my audience is very diverse in the same ways now. You'll see hippies at my show. You'll see guys in business suits, and you'll see people of all stripes in between. You'll see an Assange people out front. With the stand and their signs. You'll see in front of my shows. I mean, and then you'll see anti-war tables set up and stuff like that. So, and it brings together those issues. Bring together people from all political stripes, right? And so that's what my message. So it's been great for me. It's also exactly what you said. Have I lost gigs? But yeah, I've been slandered. People who know me all my life talk shit about me on social media in the most despicable ways. And but that's what, hey, I'm getting used to it. I mean, that's what happened when I wouldn't vote for Hillary. That's what happened when I debunked Russiagate. From day one, it was debunkable because it was all based on the idea that Russia hacked into the DNC server and then gave it to Julian Assange. That's not what happened. and I proved that it didn't happen that way. That nobody hacked into that thing, and it's been proven that no, they never had. I proved that because I brought Bill Binney on, the top NSA code breaker, and so from day one, I was out in front of. Give me a pothead comedian. So the point of me telling you this is that if I could do that, that means everybody else knew too, right? People who know anything about anything knew that it was always bullshit, and now we know from the Durham report that it was. So I lost a lot of friends when I debunked it. Russiagate, they said I was a Trumper because that's how, because most people are shallow and have a very shallow understanding of current events, and they believe what they see on the television.
Yeah, I just heard you call him a con man. I don't think Trumpers call the guy the con man like you do.
Yeah. I mean, Trump, but they have to make Trump out to be a 10-foot tall Hitler in order to get you to vote for Weekend at Bernie's, right? And that's and I'm no fan of Trump, but I'm aware of the game that's being played, and I'm aware that the fact that Trump was actually less horrible than Joe Biden in a lot of ways, foreign policy wise, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But they're all the same. Trump is a billionaire. He serves the billionaire class. He didn't do any of the things he promised. He said he was going to give everybody health care. He was going to bring jobs back. He was going to fix immigration. He didn't do anything. So none of that stuff got fixed.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was saying, I talk a lot about cancel culture. I interview a lot of comedians, and I'm almost exhausted by the topic, but I don't think we should be exhausted because I think it does matter. But just giving your perspective and your wisdom on the subject, what is not discussed enough about the subject, or is there something happening, bubbling up beneath the surface that we'll see in the future? Anything unexplored about this topic? Because I don't want to bang the same drum again and again, but it is important at the same time.
What topic?
Cancel culture.
So I finally figured out, I mean, so the way cancel culture comes in a lot of different forms, right? But there are certain people who become uncancelable, right? Like Joe Rogan, right? Now you can't cancel a podcast. They tried to cancel Alex Jones. They kind of did, right? Because they got him kicked off all the platforms at once, which was actually a conspiracy against him, which is exactly what he said they would do, and they validated exactly. And so now we all know that it was the government working in collusion and with the FBI and social media companies all working together to censor people, which should be a huge scandal. But because the corporate media, which is owned by the people who wanted the censoring done in the first place, don't want it to be a scandal, regular people walking around don't think it's a scandal. They think that the Twitter files was all a big right-wing bullshit thing made up by Matt Taibbi and Elon Musk or something. That's so. Yeah, I keep getting lost. I keep forgetting what the question was.
No, it's okay. I'm talking about cancel culture, just something that's less commonly tapped into.
Let me just say this about the LGBTQ, especially the TQ part. So everybody was on board for LGBTQ rights. Everybody's all for everything, and then a small fraction of the TQ part started to think that they should have more rights, and the way to get them is to use cancel culture and call people names and phobes and make them so afraid to even talk about it that's how they're going to get. And that's the exact opposite way. That's not how gay people got their rights in the first place. The way gay people got their rights in the first place was by engaging and by showing you that gay people are just like everybody else. They're no different. And so the latest wave of gay rights activism has totally abandoned that. And what they're trying to do is trying to make people afraid to talk about anything, afraid to have earnest discussions or even ask questions. You're immediately called a phobe, and you're immediately tried to get canceled. They tried to cancel Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle's bigger than those people. And he proved it, and Dave Chappelle was right. And
Dave Chappelle also, in his special, gave a glowing, beautiful personal tribute to a trans comic who had passed away, and people just ignore that. I mean, he treated the trans person with more dignity and compassion than you could possibly imagine from a comedian, and yet they ignored that as well.
Yeah, and so again, I think there was a really small, vocal minority of the LGBTQ community, and I think they tricked a lot of people into thinking that somehow Dave Chappelle is anti-trans or transphobic. And I don't think what Dave Chappelle's jokes, I don't think they were mean or punching down, or they didn't incite anyone to violence. He's he's a comedian doing comedy, and that's all that was. And if you don't think that you can make jokes about the LGBTQ community, you're wrong. Them now you're being patronizing to them. I love the Chicago Cubs. I still make jokes about them. I love my wife. I make jokes about them. You about her. You can't, if you take someone and say they're so delicate that you can't do obvious comedy or contradicting or satire or anything about this. That's treating them in the condescending, patronizing way. And I'm not going to do that to the trans community because I actually do respect them. And I think that there's a vocal minority whose tactic of trying to cancel people has backfired now. It has backfired. And so there's a backlash, and there's nobody's against trans people. Nobody's against drag queens, or nobody was, until they started involving kids. In California, you can't use a tanning bed until you're 18, even if your parents say it's okay. So, and nobody's against. So just think about that for 5 seconds before you talk about gender affirming surgeries for kids, when 80% of kids who have body dysmorphia as children grow out of it. And we know that. Yeah. So there's no science, there's no studies, there's no anything. And if you ask questions like I'm asking right now, like, is there studies? What is the science? Can we question that? You're immediately called a phobe and an anti-something, and that doesn't work. But that doesn't work. It's not how gay people got their rights. And so my unbelievably long answer to your cancel culture question is that I think people are getting beyond cancel culture now.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope you're right, and that's a great example. By the way, I know that President Biden often calls into your show, and those bits are brilliant. Do you think that he's going to emerge in 2024 as the standard bearer, or is the replacement being groomed as we speak?
Hey, I didn't think that they're not going to let RFK Jr. obviously become the nominee. They're going to find a way to stop him, like they stopped Bernie Sanders, right? But I didn't think Joe Biden was going to make it through the first election. So I'm the last guy that I'm bad at predicting. I didn't think, I'm like, there's no way this is going to work. Right. And somehow they did it. And so I think they have balls big enough to think they could do it again. I really do.
Yeah, I think you're right. Jimmy, one last question before I let you go. Looking forward to 2024, I think Trump will stick around for better and worse, of course. Is there something left to wring out of Trump at this point, comedically speaking? I feel like, when Clinton, it was the horny Clinton jokes, and Bush had the dumb jokes. I feel like we got burned out quickly. Now, any kind of Trump humor just seems to land with a thud. As a political satirist, do you still see fresh material there? Is there an angle we can apply, or what? How do you approach him at this point?
Is there a fresh angle to
Trump?
There's the angle that I talked about at the top of the show about how what makes him a real threat is that not that he lied. Isn't that hilarious to you, Christian, that people with a straight face will feign outrage over a politician lying in Washington?
I've never seen it before.
They hate him because of the truth he tells. And Dave Chappelle said something similar to that when he hosted Saturday Night Live. Yeah, there's certainly a different angle to Trump, and what he exposes about America and about our political system is that everything they claimed Trump was going to do, they did. They've been trying to jail their political opponent, the only one the establishment has, which is Donald Trump. Isn't that ironic? A billionaire is somehow an outsider. He's hated by the donor class, and that's why this is being allowed to take place. And they get their corporate media to say it's okay. And so everybody thinks it is okay, and they think he actually is a bigger criminal somehow than the last president or the president before that. Can you imagine? They're going to try to put him in jail or prosecute him over whatever the fuck kind of paper he had when Dick Cheney and George Bush walked the earth, when they lied us into a war and ordered a torture program to cover it up. And everybody knows they did. But anyway, so yeah, I think there's always going to be a fresh way to cover Donald Trump because 99% of the comedians aren't going to take that lane, and they leave it open for me. So it's a big help.
I completely agree. But Jimmy, thank you so much for joining the Hollywood in Toto podcast. And if you're not listening to Jimmy's show, go there right now. Obviously, check it out. But you can also see his killer stand-up special, COVID Lies Are Funny. Just go to his website, jimmydore.com, and it's a steal at $10. Or you can see him on the road. He's got touring details also at the website, jimmydore.com. If you need a quicker fix, follow him on Twitter at Jimmy_Dore. Thank you so much, Jimmy. Really appreciate it. And keep on doing exactly what you're doing. We need it now.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Nice to talk to you.
Before we wrap things up, I noticed one of my favorite recent films just got added to the Netflix lineup. It's called Thank You for Your Service, and it's a brilliant drama that shows how hard it is for military members to adjust to civilian life once the war ends. Now, Miles Teller is a star here, and he's never been better. He's a really terrific actor, absolutely top-notch. He plays a soldier who's struggling with life away from the battlefield. Now, I think other films have touched on these themes before. I think in more recently, more and more Hollywood productions are exploring this particular topic, and that's a great thing. This is very raw storytelling, no doubt, but there's enough insight and hope and humanity here to make it less gloomy than it sounds. I always fear those, those eat your vegetables kind of movies. This is not that kind of film. It's got great performances, and it really does appreciate what soldiers sacrifice to keep us safe, and that's for those who come home safe and sound. You know, when it came out, I was just floored by it. I thought it was excellent. And I was thinking, oh gosh, it's going to rock the awards season, right? This is an amazing movie. It got almost completely overlooked in 2017's awards season. But that doesn't take anything away from its power and beauty, that's for sure. Set some time aside and watch Thank You for Your Service on Netflix. You won't regret it. All right, that's it for this week's show. Thank you to Radio America, as always, for having me as a part of their fine podcast lineup. And while I have your ear, I hope you'll drop by HollywoodInToto.com. That's my home base. It's updated 7 days a week, and it gives you the skinny on what's woke and what's worth your hard-earned dollars. See you next time.